everyone. Welcome. We have a packed agenda tonight, so let's. We're getting a bit of feedback, aren't we? Can we deal with this? It's sorted. Okay. Do we have any apologies for absence?
Councillor Francis Taylor may be late to the meeting.
Okay. Thank you very much. I can't see Richard. Councillor John, are you there?
Not at the moment, no.
Okay. We'll bear that in mind, and just for the record, if something's detained Councillor John, we will take his questions. Do we have any declarations of interest? You're here, Richard. Good. Good to see you.
Afternoon, everyone.
Afternoon. In that case, we'll come to item 3 on the agenda, the draft revenue and capital budget proposals 2024-25. Over to you, Councillor Callard.
Thank you, Leader. The 2024-2025 budget has been particularly difficult to set. This year, as it was last year, we've needed to bridge a funding gap of over £20 million to continue to provide the same services. The challenges facing local government finances have been widely reported, so we in Monmouthshire are not alone in facing such challenges. It would at least be a little comforting to regard these circumstances as exceptional. But sadly, a reduction in public services is the new normal. All over Wales and all over the UK, councils are being forced to do more for less for their populations. Our primary funding comes from 3 sources: the Welsh Government, council tax, and fees for some of the services which we provide. This year, our funding from Welsh Government is due to go up by an additional 2.3%, providing £2.6 million in extra funding. We understand the funding constraints that Welsh Government is under, but nonetheless, we're disappointed in the draft settlement and we will continue to press for an increase. The second main source of our funding comes from us, the residents of Monmouthshire, in council tax. During this year's budgeting process, we've fought hard to try and keep the increase in council tax as low as possible. However, our commitment to try and protect valued public services has meant that we are proposing to increase council tax by 7.5% this year. As you know, reserves have been drawn down over the last decade and can no longer be used to support our day-to-day spending. This rise, which needs to be taken in the context of the current historical high levels of inflation, allows us to keep open all our leisure centres, hubs, libraries and recycling centres. It also means that we can continue to provide adequate care to our residents who require it and maintain our current waste collection services. We will also continue to fully fund the council tax reduction scheme, which, along with other council tax support, provides council tax discounts to those who need it. In total, around 1/3 of all households in Monmouthshire pay a reduced rate of council tax. But our cautious approach also means that we've had to make some tough choices. We are proposing that the fees we charge for such things as garden waste collections and parking will increase. We plan to start charging for food waste bags and change the opening hours of our museums and leisure centres. We've also only been able to increase our funding to education by 2.5%, which is less than we would like to, and we know it will increase the pressure on delegated schools' budgets. Despite this, and despite the very clear challenges that the current climate imposes on us, I commend this budget to Cabinet today. We have to tread a fine line in prioritising the services that our residents most value, protecting the vulnerable, and handling the council's finances in a responsible way. I believe this budget achieves the same, and I look forward to engaging with our residents and businesses to hear their ideas during the consultation period. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Callard. Does Cabinet have any comments or observations you'd like to make? Been detailed, very challenging process that we've been through, but a very robust one as well. Whereas Councillor Callard has set out how we have set the foundations for going forward over the coming period, in line and aligned with the core principles of our administration, tackling inequalities, ensuring that we protect our environment, we're financially sustainable at all times, and that we do so when possible in a meaningful partnership. And that is how we must continue. I'll move to questions from Councillor John. And given the seriousness of this particular item, I do suggest we take each question in turn. Councillor John.
Okay, thank you, and thank you, Councillor Callard, for the presentation. And you touched on the point of my first question in your presentation, because my question was about why there's been no evidence of the administration lobbying the Welsh Government for a better settlement, and in particular a 3% funding floor. You'll be aware the funding floor has currently been set at 2%. If it was raised to 3%, that would give an additional £700,000 for Monmouthshire, obviously not just this year, but for subsequent years as well. So can you tell us what lobbying you have been doing of Welsh Government, and particularly in terms of building relationships with other underfunded councils like Wrexham, Flintshire, Powys, Conwy? I'd be interested to hear a bit more about that, please.
Thank you, Councillor John. We regularly lobby Welsh Government, both directly and indirectly through the WLGA regarding our funding settlement. You'll notice I laid out in my opening remarks that we were disappointed with our settlement, but we do understand the reasons for it because of the constraints which the Welsh Government finds itself under. And I would encourage you, Councillor John, to support our lobbying efforts by lobbying your friend, the Secretary of State for Wales, in order to improve the funding which Wales gets as well. So thank you for the question.
I'd be very happy to support the lobbying of Welsh Government for a better settlement, but as I say, I haven't seen any evidence of any lobbying as yet. My next question is about the process that you went through as a cabinet. So can you tell me, how did you assess the cumulative impact of these proposals? Because it does feel that for the second year running, the burden of these budget cuts does seem to disproportionately fall on the shoulders of children and young people, which feels really quite unfair. So what process did you go through in assessing that, please?
Thank you for the question. I think this is a very important area. You'll be able to see in Appendix 2 of the papers we've provided that we've been through a detailed impact assessment on how our proposals will affect various sections of our society across Monmouthshire. And, you know, we have had to make tough choices across all of our portfolios, which are very challenging. There is a little bit of context here, I suppose, whereby our population in Monmouthshire is ageing, and in fact we are seeing, and we have seen a decrease in our population from 0 to 14-year-olds of nearly 10%. So that funding, where it's going down, we do acknowledge that it will have an impact, but I do think it has to be taken in that context, and whereby we've seen our median age over the last decade increase from 45 to 49, and therefore we have the associated impacts and additional demands that you would expect to see on our health and social care portfolio. But you know, it's a good question, an area we are conscious of, and something that we are you know, doing our best to support.
Okay, thank you.
Just for your information, Councillor John, You'll be able to go on the WLGA website to discover how we collectively with other local authorities have been working with the Welsh Government and lobbying them for a much better, well, I wouldn't say that, for an adult, mature discussion on what we need as a local authority. We recognise and acknowledge that the Welsh Government did give an uplift to local government. And as Councillor Callaghan said, there was a disappointment. So we used our collective voice through WLGA and also our individual voice through those connections and relationships that we have built up since taking over the administration, which, as you've pointed out in the past, than are now. And we will continue to do that through both channels. As we move forward, remember, not only is our budget a draft budget, but so is the Welsh Government's. And there is still many issues and items that we are currently discussing with them.
Right.
Yes, of course you can.
Can I just share some thoughts on the discussion? I mean, I share all disappointments with the level of grants awarded to local governments in Wales, averaging around 3%. And I believe that this authority has joined with all other local authorities in making the case as Welsh Government moves from its draft budget to its final budget. Making the case once again, it was certainly made loud and clear before the draft budget that the priority, according to local government, is a very strong case for enhancing that priority. We continue to make that case. I'll just share a thought also on the discussion we've had on the funding floor. The allocation to each authority around the average has varied. We're below average with 2.3%. The average is around 3%. Many authorities are above 3%. But just echo what Councillor Callaghan said, that this reflects the relative movement in population throughout Wales. And where key groups, such as our school age population, is actually declining. It's not rising as fast as everyone else is. When it's actually declining, there is some inevitability that has an effect on the share. This is what the formula is intended to do. It will affect the share of the total amount accorded to Monmouthshire. It does impact on the discussions we'll have during this year on our local development plan, insofar as we can look forward to a time when the growth of the grants to Monmouthshire reflects the rest of Wales. We will need a growth in our population, and in particular, our younger population that reflects what's happening in the rest of Wales. So these things are linked. Welsh Government has regularly used a funding floor to try and protect those in various difficult times, which are at the lower end of the allocation. But I think it's worth noting that this is always a temporary benefit. Those authorities who are in receipt of the funding of a grant from the funding floor this year will, in due course, find that their grant has to be adjusted to reflect their formula allocation and reflect what their population actually is. If places like Newport and Cardiff continue to grow at the rate they have, they will get the growth which other authorities won't get, and that comes from their share of the cake, if you like. So just take care of assuming that always increasing the funding floor gives you permanent benefit. That doesn't actually happen. It defers the problem. Sometimes there's good reason for doing that, but it does only defer the problem.
Thanks, Councillor Griffiths. I think that's useful, and I'm sure this issue will come up in a full council at some point, and that would be a useful reminder to all of us when we're thinking through this. If there is no more questions or observations, I suggest we move to recommendations. Recommendation 2.1, that we approve the release of the draft revenue budget proposals. Are we in agreement, Cabinet?
Yeah.
Yeah. 2.2, that we approve the release of its draft capital budget proposals and indicative capital budgets as set out in Appendix 4. Are we in agreement?
Yeah.
2.3, that we note the adverse implications and the current uncertainties arising out of the provisional budget announcement of the Welsh Government and agree the response outlined in Appendix 3. We agreed, Cabinet? And the last recommendation, that Cabinet recommends the use of 2.8 of capital receipts to fund revenue costs associated with organisational change. Are we in agreement with this last recommendation? Yeah. Thank you very much, Cabinet. I'd like us to move on to the next item on the agenda, the Community and Corporate Plan update, which happens to be nice. This is important, Cabinet, in that the Community and Corporate Plan lays out very clearly what our principles are, the way that we intend to approach working with communities and partners, and what we intend to do. What are our key objectives? And all these objectives are lined up because we have the clear purpose to become a zero carbon county, supporting well-being, health and dignity for everyone at every stage of life. So this report looks at those objectives and it focuses on progress updates. And I'd remind Cabinet that the Community and Corporate Plan was not passed by Council till last year in April. No, yeah, in April. So we're not reporting on a full year. When we do come to report on the full year, it'll be in the self-assessment plan, where we will be looking much more at progress towards intended outcomes. This is a progress report. The initial assessment was produced by officers on available evidence, and you know it has been brought more than one occasion to our attention, and we've had discussions around it, as all of you will have had discussions with your own officers about progress so far. So if I quickly go through each of those objectives, and I'd bear in mind, while they are scored, we recognise that we are in the early stages of implementing our plan. What we're expecting to see in place is some of the building blocks which would allow us to deliver at pace to the outcomes that we want to see. Those scores reflect where we are now. They still show that we have a long way to go, but that progress is being made, and in some cases quite good progress. So our first objective of a fair place to live has been scored at 4. We're using a scale which we have used consistently in Council for some years now, prior to us taking up. 4 is showing good progress, because we've put in place services that will help people who are struggling with the cost of living, and this has been reported elsewhere in Council and taken to scrutiny. And these interventions that we've taken contribute to bringing stability to people's lives, while we work with communities to develop the preventative services that will make a real difference in the long term, such as our work with partners across Gwent to become a Marmot region and to tackle health inequalities. Our second objective, a green place to live, score of 3. We are putting in place the building blocks. This includes new strategies for climate, food and flood, but we are very aware that much of what we can do as a council is about working with partners to influence, to advocate, to come to common solutions. It's not something we can do on our own as a council. And that takes time to build up the relationships, which we have done. And it will take more time for us to see the benefit of these strong working partnerships that we are putting in place at the moment. But in key areas, including a 9% reduction in emissions from our operations and a 6% increase in the amount of renewable energy that we can generate from our estate, we're also exceeding recycling targets and are among the top local authorities in Wales to do so. We are committed to become net zero by 2030, but the level of investment needed, we know, will make this very challenging. And if you look at the budget, draft budget proposals now, and the forecast for the next 2 years, we are keenly aware of our room to manoeuvre around this area. Thirdly, a thriving and ambitious place. We're making good progress. We scored it a 4. And most of the work has been focused on developing plans to improve our places, our towns. We've been able to secure funding for much of this work, which has led to this higher evaluation score. We've begun to see shovels on the ground in some of our projects, in particular our active travel schemes. And we've seen some improvements against key measures. We are working fiercely, I would say, at pace to delivering the deposit plan for our local development plan. A safe place to live. We recognise there is still much to do. We've been able to increase the availability of accommodation and have developed new approaches and partnerships to support people. Our housing transition plan is starting to show real dividends, and we're seeing trends in reduced numbers of homelessness, but against that is the fact that people who are presenting as homeless the cases are far more complex, and we're starting to recognise hidden homelessness also, where people may be couch surfing or living with their parents or living with friends because there is nowhere else they can live. But we have seen an 18 percentage point improvement in homeless prevention and a 35% reduction in the use of bed and breakfast accommodation, and that's real progress, Cabinet. A connected place where people can care. We are making improvements in a number of key measures, including reductions in the size of care packages, following our transformation plans, reablement, and our Building Stronger Families interventions. We're prioritising those in greatest need, but increasing demand and finite resources mean we cannot meet everyone's needs in a timely way. And that's true across the whole of the UK at the moment, unfortunately. 84% of people using adult care report that they're happy with the care and support. And as you will know, a full report on our social services was given by the head of that directorate at Council in December. A learning place, our last objective. We're making good progress because the quantitative measures we have available to demonstrate progress are limited. I'm pleased to say that we should have better school data coming forward, where we can really start to track school by school how we're doing in improving the life chances of the children who need the most support because of their disadvantaged start in life in one way or another. Like elsewhere in Wales, school attendance has declined since the pandemic. We've rolled out the new curriculum for Wales and the development of the new 3 to 19 net zero school in Abergavenny. I must have moved campuses. That's continued at pace, and we want to see it open at the start of the next, the new building, that is, not the new school, at the start of the next academic year. But all the measures that we've put in place over the last 18 months and over the period of this plan, where we moved in a much stronger pace, it will take time for this to come through. We're starting from early ages right up to 19, and some of the benefits of what we're doing now may well not be seen till after this council ends and a new council begins. To finish Cabinet, I know that you're all using the progress report as a basis for discussions with their chief officers and relevant heads of service to identify where we can improve, what lessons we need to learn, and where we need to put remedial actions in place so we meet our targets and our expected outcomes. We're making good progress against our priorities. However, given the financial and environmental context in which we are working, we do have to temper our ambitions with a large dose of realism. What I've done, as you know, is to ask Cabinet to come together with SLT in the coming weeks to reflect on the deliverability of the community and corporate plan in the light of this budget settlement, but also in the light of our expectations over the next 2 to 3 years. We will also use this as an opportunity to set out some revised measures alongside targets for performance up to 2026-27. Where possible, and I am absolutely determined we do this, Cabinet, we will move towards improved measurements of outcomes rather than outputs. It has always been a challenge for local government. I'm not going to single out Monmouthshire alone. Since time immemorial, really, to move from output monitoring to really focusing on what we want to see that really makes a difference, what impacts we want to see. And having just today read the latest report from the Welsh Audit Office on this very matter, they too are strongly suggesting to all councils that we need to up our pace in thinking through how we become impact orientated. Thank you, Cabinet. Do I have any questions or observations from?
If I could just make a brief observation, Leader, on behalf of those involved in education. I think the service is probably slightly different to any other in the local authority in that so much of the resources and funding are devolved to individual bases. And I would like to pay great credit to our schools, because when we came into administration in the county and set out a very clear direction that is now, I think, fully reflected in the corporate plan, we asked schools to come along with us and share that vision. And it was a vision very much focused on enabling every individual pupil to be in a much better place to fulfill their individual abilities. And I think we're in a position where we have made great progress, and we will see the outcomes of that from now on. But it would not have been possible to do that without the support and the dedication of all the staff, not just those who work in County Hall or who work centrally for the local authority, who, my goodness, they work their socks off, but every teacher in every school. And I would like to pay a great personal thanks to them for their role in enabling us to be where we are now.
Thanks, Councillor Groocock. Education, lifelong learning, really ensuring that every child in Monmouthshire can reach their potential with our support is one of our key priorities. And I know you are focused on this and are committed to ensuring that we really do see genuine change that each child can feel has made a difference to their lives. Councillor Chandler?
Yeah, thanks, Leader, and thanks for presenting this report. And I think I just wanted to really make an observation that the importance of this assessment, albeit this is an officer assessment at a very early stage in the delivery of our corporate and community plan. I mean, it is important both for our accountability to the public, but also as a tool for us to develop our plans, to revise, to look at the delivery of our ambitions and how we can move forward on that. So I think it's very useful. I did want to just though ask a little bit more about in what you said earlier. Clearly, some areas are easier to measure than others. You talked about the outcome measures rather than outputs, and I think that's very important. Some areas where we have less direct control, so not so much our core services, but some of the other areas, and I'm thinking particularly around our response to the climate and nature emergency, but also our inequalities or our equality agenda. I think we recognise we need to be able to develop some of those indicators and methods of measuring against those indicators a bit more robustly. I just wondered what sense of a timetable we may have for bringing such measures back to Cabinet for us to consider.
The timetable I'm considering, if I can roll back a minute, Councillor Chandler, I think you're absolutely right. With the outcomes we want to look at, we have to be very conscious about what we can actually deliver and be held accountable for, and what we can contribute to and should be tracking. And they are very distinct, aren't they? And I have, in my role as leader, but also portfolio lead on performance, asked officers to look at good practice elsewhere that we can learn from to that regard. Which they are currently doing and have been doing for some time. And we would be looking at a time frame, I think, of March, April, when we're in full discussions, and April time, that we can have a real sense of what the new framework would look like. And because that has to be aligned to looking again at the community and corporate plan in terms of the financial situation that we find ourselves in, looking at where the strategic direction we must keep focused on and how we can drive through our key priorities. That must, alongside it, have those indicators, key performance indicators, as well as outcome indicators where they may diverge in some way. So we must do it together, and we must be ready to bring that to Cabinet April, ready, fresh for the next year of Council. Thanks very much. Is there any other? With that, I'll bring us to the recommendations. There are four. The first recommendation that we use this report as part of our continuing monitoring, and I think we are doing that now, but we do agree that this is the purpose of the report. Is a living document. It's a document which allows us to drive performance. Yes, Cabinet?
Yeah.
That we approve the targets for 2023-24.
Yep.
We are going forward reflecting on the deliverability of the community and corporate plan in the light of the budget settlement and the outlook for the following years.
Yeah.
Agreed? And that we agreed to receive a report in the first quarter of 2024 setting out revised measures along targets for performance. Are we agreed?
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Cabinet. So we move on to item 5, response to Welsh Government's phase 2 consultation on a fair council tax system. Over to you.
Thank you, Leader. Welsh Government committed to reforming council tax in Wales in its 2021 cooperation agreement with Plaid Cymru. Phase 2 consultation launched a year later in November 2023 and seeks views on updating and reforming the council tax system in Wales with the aim of making it fairer and more progressive. The Phase 2 consultation is seeking views on both the scale of the reform and the timelines for introducing any changes. The consultation is seeking views on 3 main approaches. Approach 1, minimal change. This approach maintains the current 9 council tax bands and involves a revaluation exercise to update band thresholds to reflect modern property values. Option 2, modest reform. This approach retains the current 9 council tax bands, updates the band's thresholds to reflect modern property values, and includes changes to the council tax rates charged for each band, and option 3, expanded reform. This option is aimed at making the council tax system more progressive. It proposes an increase to the number of council tax bands to 12, with 1 extra band at the bottom and 2 at the top, along with the revaluation and a change in the tax rates. The consultation also seeks views on the timelines for the change, with, again, 3 options proposed. Option 1 is the quickest pace of change, which would start from the middle of next year. Option 2 would defer this until the next Senedd term, which would be from April 2028 at the earliest. And option 3 is to implement any changes in stages, starting with the minimal reform and moving on to an expanded implementation at a later date. The council has studied the proposals and the accompanying analysis by the IFS. This analysis indicates that each of the 3 proposed options could have the potential to negatively impact households in the county. The council's response to the consultation, found in Appendix 1, therefore considers the preferred options to be option 1, which is the minimal change, which will in effect update the valuation of properties across Wales to reflect their values, and this option would provide the lowest impact to households in the county. And on the pace of reform, we are recommending the slower pace of reform, with minimal or expanded reform starting in 2028, giving the potential impact to these approaches to households across Wales. We consider the fastest timetable to represent too much of a shock to households. If the expanded reform approach is taken, then this needs to be adopted over time, as this would put strain on both households and the council's budget. I believe this response also aligns with the motion passed by council on the 7th of December, and our consultation response will be accompanied by a letter from our leader as called for by this motion. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Councillor Callard. Are there any contributions from Cabinet? In which case, Councillor Dunn, I'll bring you in.
Thank you very much, and thank you for bringing the paper to Cabinet for discussion. Your response to the consultation recognised that all 3 approaches will adversely affect Monmouthshire residents and also lead to unintended pockets of poverty. So on that basis, during a cost of living crisis, how on earth can you think that now is an appropriate time for a council tax revaluation?
Thank you, Councillor John, for the question. The consultation asked for responses to each of the proposed approaches, and our response speaks to this rather than the wider principles of council tax reform. Our response to the consultation, if Welsh Government is to progress the reforms, is the option that has the least impact, as much as one that sees a delay to the timeline for implementation. I think that last point looks to take consideration of Wales and the UK moving itself, out of the cost of living crisis in the future. And I would add by saying that I think if we are going to have a tax that's based on property values, it seems sensible that those values are kept up to date, so that tax reflects the value which is intended to tax.
Okay. And can I ask why the response makes no mention of the unfairness of the current funding formula? The fact that Monmouthshire residents already carry a far greater burden of funding council services than elsewhere in Wales, and why does the document fail to argue against redistributing funding from Monmouthshire to better funded councils who have hundreds of millions of pounds sat in reserves?
Thank you, Councillor John, for the question. Welsh Government, in its proposed consultation, are looking to equalise the funding for local authorities and such that no authority is affected in terms of its overall funding levels in the years of implementation. In an environment where we are facing public spending constraint over the medium term and the need to sustain council finances, then it could be argued it's advantageous in maintaining a strong council tax base so we can have greater control over our future decisions that affect the council's funding levels. So your point about reserve levels of local authorities, it's not something that could practically be taken into account as part of the proposed reforms to council tax. However, it should be noted that the response to the provisional settlement that was considered as part of the draft budget proposals earlier in the agenda makes specific reference to reserve levels needing to be taken into account when the distribution formula is allocated.
Okay, and I also noted the Cabinet's support for a land value tax, which is cited in the report. What consideration has the Cabinet given to the impact that this would have on Monmouthshire residents, including in the agricultural industry?
Our response in the consultation is really one that suggests why the Welsh Government has not explored alternative options other than a council tax, and suggests a land value tax is an alternative. Such an option would require further work to assess its impact, but specifically around our farmers and agricultural businesses in Monmouthshire, I would expect that generally they would be paying business rates rather than council tax. So we would expect this not to affect them. But as I said, I think the main point is that it was proposed as an alternative, as an example. I hope that makes sense.
Okay, thank you.
Can I come in?
Yeah, of course. I was trying to read the runes of your face.
If nobody else, I'll just extend the discussion a little further. The motion that was passed on the Welsh Government's proposals for reform of council tax, the motion that was passed by Monmouthshire County Council specifically asked for options 2 and 3 to be opposed. The council did not ask for option 1 to be opposed. Option 1 being that property values used for council tax purposes should reflect contemporary values. There should be a revaluation. And I think Monmouthshire County Council was very wise. As Councillor Callett said, there's something irrational in having a property tax which does not reflect contemporary property values. England suffers enormously in not having had a revaluation since 1990. Properties in parts of London reflecting their history of that time of being proletarian terraces, now worth several million, and being taxed as if they were still a working class terrace. That is unjustified. We don't want that situation in Wales, and therefore I think, following our council's decision, would be supporting that there should be a second revaluation. It's not in the response. My personal view is that we should move to a continuous system of revaluation so that you don't get these stark changes at sort of 10 or 20-year intervals, that they happen continuously over time. The mantra that keeps being repeated about the unfairness of the current funding formula, the principles of that funding formula have been in place now since the early 1990s. They were put in place by Conservative Secretaries of State, David Hunt and John Redwood, as the funding formula for the reformed system of local government. The basic principle of that formula is that it should be an equalisation grant, that it should ensure that those parts of Wales with the lowest property value The lowest ability, therefore, to gain revenue from council tax should have the highest level of grants per capita. It does mean that in an area like Monmouthshire, where you've got the highest property values and the highest return from council tax, that the grant per capita will, in the case of Monmouthshire, be the lowest. That's consistently been the case since 1996, since it was put in place by those Conservative Secretaries of State. So I'm continuously puzzled by this repetitive mantra of the unfairness of the current formula. I'd like to know what the alternative would be. There's not going to be a land value tax in Wales, so let's not scaremonger about that. What Welsh Government concluded is that it doesn't have the powers to introduce such a land value tax. But for those who are interested, there's been, I think, a fascinating debate in the Financial Times over the last year on a land value tax, with the editorial line of the Financial Times being in favour of such a tax introduced across the UK. The view of the Financial Times is that around about 60% of the assets in the United Kingdom are unproductive. And the only way to incentivize their more productive use is to tax their value as an unproductive asset. Specifically in the discussions, they note that the productive use of land by agriculture would be protected in the introduction of a land value tax as they propose. So there's no need to scaremonger. It's not going to happen. If it does happen, there are recommendations in place which would protect the productive use of land in agriculture. Thank you.
Thank you. I think I'm going to check out the Financial Times. That's fascinating. If there's no more comments, Cabinet, shall we go to the one recommendation that we agree Monmouthshire County Council's response to the Phase 2 consultation questions as set out in Appendix 1? Are we agreed?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if we can move now to item 6, the revised counter fraud, corruption and bribery policy.
It's over to me again, I think. Thank you. I'd like Cabinet to consider and approve the Council's updated and revised counter-fraud, corruption and bribery policy. The previous anti-fraud, corruption and bribery statement was approved by Cabinet in June 2017. In line with good practice, this policy should be reviewed and updated periodically. The revised policy is shown in Appendix 1. Monmouthshire County Council is one of the largest organisations in the county. The council controls millions of pounds of public money and takes very seriously the high expectations of the public and the degree of scrutiny to which the affairs of the council are subject. Good corporate governance requires that the authority must demonstrate clearly that it is firmly committed to dealing with fraud and corruption and will deal equally with perpetrators from inside the council, be they members or employees, and outside the council. In addition, there will be no distinction made in investigation and action between cases that generate financial benefits and those that do not. There are two main changes between this policy and the one that it replaces. The first is the inclusion of a fraud response plan, which can be found in Appendix 1. And the second is the recommendation that all members of the council and council officers complete counter-fraud, corruption and bribery training as appropriate to their role in order to increase organisational effectiveness in preventing, detecting and responding to fraud. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Councillor Callard. I think this is fairly straightforward. It's absolutely essential that we have this in place. I don't suspect anyone will want to contribute. You made it out very clearly. But if there is an observation, show now. Okay, shall we go straight to recommendations? We have our comment from Councillor Callard. So 2.1, are we agreed, Councillor? And secondly, which follows on and is extremely important, that all elected independent members of council and council officers complete counter fraud, corruption and bribery training as appropriate to their role. We agreed? Thank you very much. So we come to the last item, I think, on our agenda. The statutory consultation, which is over to you, Councillor Councillor.
Thank you very much, Leader.
I sounded quite good there, I thought. My apologies. This is the start of the statutory process that we have to go through if we're going to increase the size of the school, and it reflects the success of Welsh medium education in the Abergavenny area. What we would like ultimately to be able to do is to move Ysgol Gymraeg Efenni into its fourth building, and a building which is modern, that we can still spend a bit of money on making it look even better than it does already, that will put Welsh medium education in a really very strong position within Northwest Monmouthshire. And from a personal point of view, I'm delighted it will be moving into my ward along with the 3 to 19 school. Just to put it into some sort of context, we are looking to consult on creating a school with 420 places, plus 60 places for pupils in the Maithrin, which is the preschool provision. The current number on roll is 254. That might seem to be quite a big gap between what the new school would hold and what the current school population is. But when you consider we're now at 254, when I first joined this council in 2017, it was 222. When I was involved as an officer in the establishment of the first Ysgol Gymraeg Efenni, there were 12. So from 12 to currently 254 and onwards to 400 plus. But we need to consult, we need to bring people with us, and I'm merely seeking consent to start that process.
It's great news, Councillor Gower. Councillor Crocott. It's been a long day. But I'm slightly concerned that both schools are in your ward. It was suggested there was some kind of educational grab here.
You've found me out, Leon.
Is there any comment? I think it's just good news, and it's good that we go out for consultation. So our recommendations is 2.1 that we agree to enter into that statutory consultation process. We all agreed, Cabinet?
Yeah.
We agree and approve the attached draft consultation document, which will be Appendix 1. We agree?
Yep.
That's great. Thank you very much. We now do move on to the last item on the agenda, which is about the county farm.
So Nick and I thought that we were about to get away with that. We were halfway down to the pub when somebody said that it'd been pointed out that we're still on the agenda. Sorry about that, Nick. So thanks, Leader. This report expands on our corporate and community plan commitments, particularly our priorities of a safe place to live where people have a home that they feel secure in, and a fair place to live where the effects of inequality and poverty have been reduced. Under the asset portfolio, we've considered how we can support those ambitions, and part of that is ensuring that our assets are maximised to the benefits of our community. So with that, we've identified a set of cottages from the County Farm portfolio that don't form part of a recognised farm holding. Of those, 4 cottages are currently vacant. They've been held in the past for the use by farm tenants when their farm is given up. Of those, and we have an example of one in the document pack, which has been vacant for around 4 years. The empty cottages are essentially not actively working for our county or our residents. So this paper does recommend an innovative approach to repurpose those unused cottages. Specifically, we're looking to utilise the vacant farm cottage in Caerwent for use as temporary accommodation for homelessness by MCC Housing. That will obviously be subject to necessary approvals on the cottage. The funding streams for those in terms of bringing the cottage up to appropriate standards multiple. They've been identified within the paper, and they include the potential use of the Welsh Government Transitional Accommodation Capital Programme. The paper also proposes a repurposing of vacant cottages to support our administration's policy objectives, as I've already mentioned, both on tackling homelessness and providing safe places to live, and children's services under our Fair Place to Live priority. So that's essentially the essence of the paper. I'd specifically like to thank our officer Nick Keys for his work on this. The paper really does demonstrate the innovation that our administration and our council is capable of and is undertaking to address the challenges that we're facing in the face of the funding constraints that we live with. With that, I'd like to hand back to you now, Leader, to move the paper's recommendations.
Thanks very much, Councillor Garrett. And I think this is really exciting development in the light of progress reported earlier on the community and corporate plan. Being able to move homelessness people out of bed and breakfasts into accommodation like this is really central to ensuring the dignity of all people, whatever their status in life, and to ensure that there are places that are safe that they can call home. Again, are there any comments from Cabinet? In which case, get on the starting blocks. You can get down to the pub, you two. We can go straight on to recommendations.
Sorry.
I think I had a question. Sorry, Leader.
Do you know, I was so wanting to ensure that both our officer and cabinet member have worked so hard on this. Not a chance to relax. I forgot, Councillor John. Forgive me.
Cabinet tries to avoid scrutiny and rush down the pub.
You can come with us if you'd like, Richard.
That's very kind.
You're always welcome to join.
I do appreciate that, a number of these properties are not going to be ideal for homelessness accommodation. And if you were starting from scratch, you probably wouldn't be looking at these properties as a starting point. So have you considered making these properties available to county farmers interested in retiring, which could release county farms, releasing farms for sale, potentially releasing hundreds of thousands of pounds, which then would enable you to make investments or perhaps purchase some properties that would be ideally suitable for tackling homelessness. Has that been considered, please?
Oh, thanks. Obviously, we do consider purchase of homes as well, and we have previously seen that come through Cabinet, and we do indeed engage with the tenants about those opportunities, but we've had that sustained period of minimal take up. Those cottages are empty, and as I mentioned, the one in particular has been empty for 4 years or so. And you can see that piece in section 3.2 of the covering report and the 2.1 of the business case. So essentially it has been considered, but in order to actually get the properties into use, this is the route that is most closely aligned with our corporate and community plans, ambitions, and most realisable as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll bring us on to the recommendations then. Recommendation 2.1 that we agree to the repurposing of the vacant farm cottage. Are we agreed, Cabinet? 2.2. We also agree to the repurposing of vacant cottages held within the county farms portfolio to support our policy objectives.
Yeah.
Do we agree? Thank you, Cabinet. 2.3 that the business cases will be submitted for the repurposing of other vacant cottages for the consideration and approval by a delegated authority of the Chief Officer for Resources in consultation with the Cabinet members for resources. Do we agreed?
Yeah.
Thanks very much, Cabinet. With that, I'll bring Cabinet to a close. Thank you very much, everyone, for attending. And thank you very much, everyone, for taking time to watch online.
Diolch yn fawr pawb. Apparently I'll see you in the pub. Cheers. Bye.
Diolch.